Yes, Mr. Chair, your subcommittee of Sinclair and Zahn recommend passage with Senator Cornbach not signing.
Senator Sinclair, you are in order for opening comments.
Thank you. Senate Study Bill 1065 is a bill that's been brought to us by the governor in regards to student success and choice in education. It has 8 divisions. I'll briefly go through each of those just as in way of opening comments. Division 1 creates a Student First Scholarship Program that provides scholarships for students entering kindergarten or currently attending a public school that has been identified as needing comprehensive support under Every Student Succeeds Act, the federal legislation. This means that in order to be eligible for this scholarship, the student must be attending or would be attending, if they're an entering kindergartner, a school that is at the highest level of need, the lowest level of performance in all of the schools in the state. Second division of the bill establishes a charter program within the state under a new chapter, Code Chapter 256E, and creates 2 models by which a charter school may be established. Currently, there is only one model, and that's a school board model. The 2 new models would be the school board model as well as a founding group that is approved then through the State Board of Education. The third division eliminates implementation of voluntary diversity plans as a reason for denying open enrollment. And this is key because if you looked at Division 1 creates a scholarship program for failing schools. And Division 3, 12 of those 34 schools identified as failing have voluntary diversity plans that trap children in a failing system. Division 4 does 3 different items. It creates a streamlined data reporting system that many administrators have requested over time. And it also creates a program innovation and student supports system. And finally, it allows for flexibility in teacher salary supplements and teacher leadership salary supplement flexibility so that if there are unexpended dollars, they may be transferred into the Flex Fund. Division 5 makes changes to the tuition and textbook tax credit and to the educator deduction expense as well. It doubles those factors going into those credits and deductions. Division 6 amends the methodology for determining enrollment for school years, and Division 6 is looking at improving student attendance in attendance centers as well as dealing with the situation related to on-time funding for growing districts. Division 7 makes changes to Iowa's open enrollment laws by creating a couple of additional good cause notification waivers based on student improvement and school improvement, or student achievement and school improvement. It also allows a district to provide transportation into the student's district of residence, and it does strike the 90-day ineligibility transfer rule for school athletes. And the final division specifies that school corporation is entrusted with public funds for the purpose of improving student outcomes, including academic achievement and skills proficiency. Mr. Chair, that concludes my opening comments.
Thank you. Are there any other senators who would like to speak on the bill? The chair recognizes Senator Selsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the bill that Iowans were dreading. 90+%, probably more closer to 92% of all students in Iowa attend public schools. This is the moment that we've been waiting for years. 2 years ago, then Education Secretary Betsy DeVos paid a visit to our lovely capital on a Friday afternoon and had a meeting with a couple of the senators on this committee, Governor Reynolds, and private school boosters, charter school boosters, all in the same room. None of the Democrats on the Education Committee from either chamber were invited to attend, which really shouldn't shock any of us, but that's the way it was. I found out that she was here, so I came up to see if I could get a word with any of the members of the delegation that were meeting with her or Secretary DeVos, but she was unavailable, the governor was unavailable, and the senators that met with her were hunkered down in a room, and I wasn't invited, and that's fine. Student First scholarships are nothing more than a voucher. Vouchers are nothing more than a way to drain public education dollars out of the state coffers and pour them directly into unaccountable private schools and charter schools. So our current budget apparently does not allow for more than, 1 or 2% per year to go to SSA. We've seen that over the last 10 years, that our SSA has not kept up with inflation. Therefore, I believe I can honestly say Iowa schools are in starvation mode at this point. And what I asked educators when I run into them, what does work? Not one of them said vouchers, not surprisingly. But what does work is smaller class sizes and more investment in preschool. That's not what we're looking at. We're not looking at any COVID relief. We're not looking at any common sense bills. We're looking at a voucher bill. There's lots of research out there, and it's not pretty. There have been many states, such as Indiana, Ohio, Louisiana, many more, who have had significant experience with vouchers, and the research all shows that the kids who leave public schools and go to voucher schools and charter schools do much worse, in fact, than kids who stay. According to the Economic Policy Institute, school vouchers are not a proven strategy for improving student achievement. Research does not show that vouchers significantly improve student achievement, and it's been found over and over and over. So not just low-income students, also students of color, students who have disabilities, and other characteristics. There's another very disturbing aspect of this bill, and that is that it's completely lacking oversight. There's an audit process. However, I just don't see how, with a skinny staff in the Department of Education, how we're going to monitor these expenditures for so many people. And there's also the point that Iowa already has a wide range of school choice, including 30,000 students open enrolled in another public school every year, homeschool assistance, and independent private instruction, open enrollment out of the 5 districts with voluntary diversity plans, an estimated 2,500 students open enrolled out of those 5 districts annually, open enrollment in an Iowa Public Virtual Academy, 34,000 students enrolled in private schools. That's always been a choice. How do I know that? I'm a private school kid. I went for first grade through 12th grade at a Catholic school. That was my parents' choice, but they weren't asking anyone to pay for it, and that's the difference. Parents do have choices. Taxpayers should not be paying for it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Scelsi. The chair recognizes Senator Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I rise in opposition to this bill for a whole host of reasons, but I want to talk about Division 2, the charter schools. The establishment of charter schools just serves to reallocate resources away from serving all students to serving a few. Our public schools need additional funding, not fewer resources. This legislation does not address the needs of the majority of Iowa family. Quite honestly, it hurts kids. Iowa already has several options for school choice, including open enrollment and the ability to go to a private school if a family chooses to pay tuition. Under this bill, charter schools are exempt from the state rules and regulations that govern public schools. Public money must have public oversight with a community-elected school board. So let me say it one more time. Public money must have public oversight with a community-elected school board. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Smith. The chair recognizes Senator Giddens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also rise in opposition to this bill for many reasons, including all of those expressed by my colleagues so far. I'd like to focus mostly, though, on the provision removing diversity plan, voluntary diversity plans from our districts that take advantage of those right now. Currently, the diversity plans that we have through state law provide districts with a tool to maintain a certain level of a minimum level of diversity in our school districts. Diversity is our strength. One of the three school districts that I represent is Waterloo Community Schools, so it would be impacted by this plan. The other two would not, but we can imagine that we would see some efforts to move potentially from the Waterloo School District to the other school districts in my Senate district. None of the three school districts in my Senate district are for this bill. In fact, I've had hundreds and hundreds of emails in recent days unanimously opposed to this bill. And, we're probably going to work on this on Thursday on the full Senate floor and, probably make some additional comments about it then. But I just want to say that maintaining diversity in our school districts is important. Diversity prepares students to succeed and work in a diverse world. I'll point to some data and evidence that we have from the state of Minnesota, which doesn't restrict open enrollment right now. A report by the University of Minnesota researchers concludes that white families are most likely to choose open enrollment when they're allowed to open enroll out. And when they did, they most often moved from diverse districts to districts with higher percentage white students. The effect of that is segregating our school districts. And this is not a good thing for us as a state. Another point is that a lack of diversity plans will hurt racial minorities. It won't help them. It will hurt them. Although our diversity plan is not based on race, the stark reality, there's a high percentage of low socioeconomic status students are racial minorities. For example, 89% of African American students and 78% of Latino students come from low SES households in districts and going to schools that are targeted in this bill. Although we don't believe that the intent of this legislation is racist, not going to say that, the experience in other urban areas that we have observed without such policies has the same effect of resegregating neighborhoods and schools. Resegregating neighborhoods and schools can tend to lead to more poverty in our communities, and that's a terrible, devastating impact in our communities that are already experiencing overwhelming challenges. What we need, as my colleagues have suggested, is not competition between schools. We need to support our public schools. When our schools are challenged, we need to give them more support, not less support. The idea, just lastly here, diversity plans trap students in a system that's failing. If that were the case, I'm not sure why the NAACP would speak out so forcefully against this bill, which they did this morning in the subcommittee. Wonderful words from the president of the Iowa-Nebraska chapter of the NAACP. This is also, lastly, this is bad for business. We have the business community in Waterloo that's going to be impacted by this is opposed to this measure. And I stand with my business community in Waterloo. I stand with all the folks I got emails from. I tried to list out the different groups of people. I got emails from parents, teachers, education support personnel, administrators, school board members, people that work at AEAs, business leaders, lots of business leaders, other community leaders throughout my district and throughout the state, unanimously opposed to this bill. So I stand here in solidarity with all of those people that reached out to me in opposing this bill. I urge my colleagues to do the same thing and vote no. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Giddens. The chair recognizes Senator Troen Garriott.
Thank you, Chair. I speak in opposition to this bill, and specifically to the open enrollment provision. I live in the Des Moines Metro, where we have a lot of school districts in close proximity. Our public schools already have open enrollment options that are sensitive to the needs and opportunities of those local districts. My neighbors have never expressed any frustration about the open enrollment process. I went through the process myself to keep my kids in the same school when we moved 2 blocks over our school district line. It worked just fine. We did not feel trapped. I don't see the point of this legislation, this particular provision, and considering how this bill was created with no input from Iowa school districts. I'm concerned of the potential to harm schools and create logistical challenges by not taking into account their unique contexts and concerns. In addition, the provision requiring the sending school districts to provide transportation adds an additional financial burden to already underfunded public schools. But in particular, I'm concerned about eliminating the 90-day waiting period for athletic eligibility. There was already flexibility in the process. If a student had a founded incident of harassment or bullying, the 90-day period was waived. But this legislation opens the door to recruiting and all kinds of unethical behavior when it comes to our high school sports. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Troen Garriott. The chair recognizes Senator Zahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to clarify a statement that was said earlier in regards to Indiana. That's the opposite, and I'd be happy, and I will email you what you said earlier about the exact opposite is what was communicated on the floor today. There has definitely been, throughout this country, improvement on student performance when parents get the opportunity to choose what their best educational opportunity is. Secondly, we've seen many places in the United States to even say the word race in regards to this bill is disingenuous. Minorities are the biggest beneficiaries, but sometimes they come from a failing school district. Right now, part of this bill is what they call the diversification section of the code that we're going to eliminate. As you know, there's 5 school districts in the state of Iowa that has a cap on open enrollment. I represent a small portion of one of the school districts, and I could tell you I heard from literally hundreds of parents that were very upset that they could not open enroll. To say that there's open enrollment in the state of Iowa is correct, but 5 school districts, it's not correct. And parents upset because they see in the suburbs, Urbandale, Johnston, Southeast Polk, all the suburbs where they're offering extracurricular activities, and some of these kids, because they're stuck in the school district they're at, didn't have the opportunity their senior year in particular to do their extracurricular activities, which in kind could have possibly provided a scholarship for them to move on. To say it's diversity is just wrong. It's a cap on open enrollment. I commend the governor and our chair of education for bringing this up, as this is something that I've talked about for several years. It's not fair that parents are stuck with whatever school because of their zip code. This eliminates that. I have seen literally dozens of kids that have turned their life around because of an educational opportunity that was provided, that this legislative body in the past has provided in regards to STOs. I was here when we passed that years ago. It changes lives. I wish that this bill would do more. I think it's a good start that we're talking about the schools that are failing their students, schools that are failing their parents. I stand with the parents. I stand with the students to give them an opportunity to find the best school of their choice. A vote against this is telling parents who are stuck in a failing school district, sorry, you have no choice. This is a huge day for parents because of the legislation we passed earlier, and students as well. So I commend the governor, and Madam Chair, I commend you as well. That'll end my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Zahn. The chair recognizes Senator Kornbach.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been here a little bit longer than most of you, so let me give you a little bit of the history on charter schools in Iowa. Charter schools in Iowa is not a new thing. In fact, it's been, a couple of decades since charters were first authorized here. Initially, there was a limit of 10 charter schools, and then the limit got raised to 20. And then when the Obama administration came along with their program, I think it was called Race to the Top, to qualify for that, we just eliminated the limit on charter schools entirely. Facts on the ground are that we never even got to 10. We never even got to that first limit. I think the most we ever had was 7. I'm told we're back down to only 2. Charter schools just aren't right for Iowa. How do you do a charter school? I'm looking at Senator Green. Madrid, city of Madrid, you represent, right? Great little town, 662 students in their school system. How do you do a charter school there? They have 1 elementary school, 1 combined junior-senior high school. You take a couple of hundred kids out of that district and the district collapses. This is not an option for rural districts or small-town districts. All that would do would be to accelerate their consolidation. Not exactly good news for any of those types of communities. The new thing about charter schools here is the possibility of forming those charter schools outside the control of the local school board, not accountable to the local school board, but yet still getting a share of the local property tax monies that otherwise would go to the public schools. So you're taking the taxpayers' money, but you have no accountability to the local officials that those taxpayers elect. I think that would be a very dangerous precedent. So we don't want to go there. Another point that I don't believe anybody else has mentioned so far, but I think it should be, was the ability here in this proposal to raid teachers' salaries, to raid the teacher salary categorical support, and the teacher leadership compensation. Those were 2 programs that we created in order to raise teacher salary, to try to make us at least sort of competitive with our neighboring states. We were 42nd in the country for teacher pay. And then we created these programs, and wow, we raised teacher pay enormously to about 26th in the country. All right? We don't have to be first in the country, but we do have to be competitive. And with a teacher leadership program, which, by the way, came out of the Branstad administration, we did that on a bipartisan basis. We put money into teachers' professional development to allow them to advance in their careers without having to leave the classroom. Those are dedicated funds to compensate teachers, to make them competitive, to help them advance in their careers. We should not allow local school districts to raid those funds. We have on a bipartisan basis, and Senator Sinclair and I worked together on this, to allow for flexibility with regard to certain other smaller funds, that if we could achieve the goals of those funds and there was money left over, yes, we could put that into a flexibility fund, which basically is to say we could put that in the general fund. But shortchanging teachers, no. I will not go along with that. The main reason here that I'm opposed to it, and this theme has come through in all of the speakers from our side. Senator Giddens talked about the diversity plans or the anti-diversity plans in this bill, abolishing diversity plans. Senator Trongaria talked about the impact of open enrollment and how that accelerates white flight. Indeed, all of the provisions of this bill, charters, vouchers, anti-diversity, they all serve the same end, which is to exacerbate the existing divisions within our society. We have become, in recent decades, more and more and more separated by race, by income, by social class, by education level. The statistics are clear. A large percentage of minority students attend majority minority schools. The same is true for white students in the opposite direction. If you look at the figures for Cedar Rapids, which does not have a diversity plan, you look at their open enrollment, and it is disproportionately white people sending their kids outside the district. Okay? We have open enrollment. We have school choice here. Even within those districts that do have diversity plans, like Des Moines, there is very substantial range of choice within that very large district. This is marketed as school choice, but really the question is choice for whom? As a practical matter, this is school choice for well-educated families, for higher income families, for families with better social connections, for people who know how to work the system to create advantages for their own children. I don't blame them for wanting to do that. But our challenge as public policy makers is how to improve the schools for everybody. Parents who want to get their kids out of a failing school, focus here in this bill is, gee, how do we help them escape? That's not where the focus should be. If we have a failing school, the focus should be on fixing the school so that the education of every child is lifted up. This bill goes in exactly the wrong direction. It is enhancing the privileges and advantages of the few at the expense of the many. That was a point that was really made this morning in the subcommittee. And I appreciate, Senator Sinclair, you opened up that subcommittee, and we did have a lot of participation. One or two off color, that's a different kind of problem we need to find a way to deal with. But if you were listening, I wasn't keeping a strict count, but the overwhelming majority of our constituents were telling us that they don't think this bill is a good idea. Let's listen to those constituents. Vote no today.
Thank you, Senator Kornbach. The chair recognizes Senator Selsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Forgive me for rising one more time. Let's talk about the kids who would use this money to go to the school of their choice. I'm thinking about some of the schools in the Des Moines district who are named in the list of schools that are quote-unquote failing. Can they really get into the school of their choice? There are several barriers that this bill really doesn't address, either that or expressly forbids. So districts surrounding the district they may want to get out of may have limitations, enrollment limitations, so they kind of get boxed in that way. That's possibly one way. However, if you're trying to get into a private school, the barriers just get taller. There's transportation and distance limitations. There's academic requirements and transcripts required. And there's less civil rights protections, which is actually addressed in the bill. It basically says, sorry, all the private school rules apply here. Astounding. I looked at two websites, one Des Moines Christian, two Pella Christian. And right on their website, it basically says, we don't discriminate against race or gender or national origin, but religion is not included in there. So does that mean you have to be a Christian to attend? Does that mean you have to be, according to their website, a Bible reading, church-going family? I don't know. So these 10,000 kids, if they're really the ones that need the most help, we're going to make them jump through all these extra hoops to get the help they need. It makes no sense. They self-select, as Senator Kornbach just said. The ones that are already at an advantage have a greater advantage because they have the transportation to get to the school of their choice. They have the wherewithal to attest to the religious pledges and maybe have higher academic requirements to be able to get in. So it's not as easy as it sounds. They can't just walk into these private schools. I went to one. I know what it's like. I just think this bill goes down several roads that we as Iowans just should not be going down. We're opening up a trap for ourselves, both financially and, I believe, morally. We owe our kids a 100% free public education. This is just taking that away from them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Selsey. The chair recognizes Senator Carlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a lawyer, I used to do custody cases early on in my career, and the court applied a very simple standard when meting out a custody decision. And that standard was the best interest of the child, basically was the guide, the overreaching consideration about the child that was the subject of a custody dispute. That put it in the hands of a court which could consider the facts of each child's life. If we let it stay the way it is, parents don't have a choice. Now, they're paying the bills because they're paying sales tax and property tax, they're paying income tax, they're paying corporate taxes on all the goods and services they buy in Iowa. They're paying. It's just they have no say where any of that money goes when it concerns their children. I personally believe that when schools are failing, they need an alternative, they need a say, they need to be empowered with a choice. I don't think any parent whose only option is a failing school is at fault for wanting a better education for their kids. So you mentioned minorities. Last year I introduced the bill on allowing an ESA for instances where the school is recognized as federally failing under the standards. Now, why I did that was specifically for minorities to have a path out of failing schools. So right now, 28% of Iowa's children are black and Hispanic. For our black students, the proficiency numbers are in the 50s. For our Hispanic male students, they're averaging 61%. That's going to be 40% of our workforce in 10 years. To accept status quo is to fail those children. They need an option. And actually, if you do, Senator Selsa, you said that they're worse off. I don't know if you're actually visiting and looking at researching how Catholic schools, for instance, compare quite favorably. In fact, minority students in Catholic schools, on average, are doing better. Those parents who pay those taxes should get that. They should get that say. Choice also fosters competition. If you want something to remain stagnant, don't introduce any competition. It's not going to go anywhere. There's no incentive to raise the bar. Where's the incentive to raise the bar? We're talking about failing schools that have been that way for a while. We're going to let a zip code determines a child's economic and educational future that's going to have generational implications for their poverty and the poverty of their children, and we're going to look the other way and just let that crap go on? No. We're not going to let it go on. We're not sticking with status quo when status quo is failing. This is an opportunity to do something good for those kids and really consider the kids and their interests and their futures and their economic outlooks rather than accept abject failure and poverty for them.
Thank you, Senator Carlin. Seeing no further discussion, Senator Sinclair, you are in order, for closing comments.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. This has been a lively debate, and I've really enjoyed it. I do want to talk about some of the points that were brought up, because as we pass this bill, it's important that we know what we're passing and that there isn't false information out there. I heard from my esteemed colleague that there was no data, or that all the data pointed to failing schools. And so I just want to say that I've done some research regarding choice in education, and I don't know if you saw me grabbing all of these papers and bringing them up here. I didn't know I was going to need all this research, but I just want to do a high level. First, there are different standards of research, and the highest standard is the gold standard, and that's an empirical study that has double blind and random assignment and all of those. Well, let me just say that we talked about a lot of issues. We talked about academic achievement of the choice students. We talked about academic achievement of the schools, affected public schools that were affected by this. We talked about fiscal impacts on taxpayers. We talked a lot about racial segregation, and we talked about what it meant to the student for their future, for that civic and social engagement. So I've got some data. And so I just want to say that I have 18 empirical studies that look at the academic outcomes for choice participants. And of those 18 studies, all but two, there were 2 that showed negative effects, 2 that showed no effect, and 14 that showed positive impacts on participating students. That's the data of empirical studies. There are 33 empirical studies that I have in front of me that talk about how choice affects the public schools and the students in the public schools. Again, 33. Of those 33, one had a negative effect on the public school around it, one program. One program had no effect on the public school around it. And wouldn't you know it, 31 had positive impacts on the academic achievement of the students in the public schools that were impacted by choice. You talked with me about what that costs the taxpayers. I have 28 empirical studies looking at school choice's fiscal impact on taxpayers and public schools. Of those, there were no studies of those empirical gold standard, randomized, as best as we can get studies. There were no negative effects on fiscal impacts on any system. There were 3 studies that showed no visible effects. which leaves you with 25 empirical studies showing that there were positive impacts, fiscal impacts, on school choice impacts on taxpayers and public schools related to it. I heard a lot about race and about segregation and about, I probably just imagined it, but Jim Crow popped into my mind, and it just infuriates me, because here's the truth. Here's the truth. School choice started because people of color were tired of their kids being stuck in failing schools. And there are 10 empirical studies looking at racial segregation related to schools. 10. No empirical studies related to racial segregation, no empirical studies related to racial segregation showed any negative impact on students and schools. One had no visible effect, so the choice option just left things status quo. But 9 studies showed a positive impact on racial segregation on our students and our schools. Finally, we talked a little bit about what it means for the student moving forward and about how civically engaged they are in their communities. And there are, I believe it's 11 empirical studies related to civic engagement and their futures. Of those 11 studies, there were no negative effects, 0 negative effects, 0 negative effects. 3 had no visible effect on their participation in their broader community, but 8 studies had positive effects on civic engagement related to school choice. So I don't know what information, I don't know what studies, I don't know what research you're looking at, but I have empirical studies, not just somebody's feels. I have empirical studies that say exactly the opposite. I do want to hit on one point from my colleague, my esteemed colleague from Story County. Senator, you mentioned that you didn't want to drain money from teacher salaries, and neither do I. But there is currently $45 million in unspent, unobligated funds in that TLS system. $45 million sitting there, not being used for innovation, not being used for salaries, not being used to support students, sitting there. $45 million, and that wasn't my choice for $45 million to sit there. It was the choice of districts who were confined by the structure of those programs, that they just couldn't spend that money. Why would we not want $45 million getting out into the general fund obligation? Because frankly, putting it into any general fund purpose allows them to get it into teacher salaries if school districts choose to. It actually does exactly the opposite of what was implied. I just want to close here for a moment. I just want to close on a couple of things. We talk about how this only affects wealthy families or families with means. Let's be honest. A family of means has already made the choice for their child. A family of means has already done what was necessary to put their child in a private school or to homeschool their child or to find a way for their child to have an open enrollment opportunity or simply moved because they could afford a new house. Families of means have already done what is necessary to serve their children in the best educational ways possible, period. So that's not what we're talking about here. And to me, it's the height of condescension that I have to hear that families of color are going to choose something less than the best for their child when given the opportunity. Or that I have to hear that families in poverty are going to choose less than the best option for their children if they're given the opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at a precipice here. We're looking at the needs of children, and we're not talking about a system. You said we didn't ask any school districts what their opinions were here. I don't care what the school district says unless the school district is saying I want what is best for every single child, not necessarily what's best to protect my system. Yes, my child goes to a public school, and my public school serves my child, and my child will stay there because it is the best choice for him. But come on, please work with me and let's open up that opportunity for choice to families who right now aren't given a choice at all. Why would we push back on this? We heard a lot of information from that subcommittee, and I think the best part to me was when Will Keep spoke up and he said, I don't care about how we do it, let's just get it done. Let's do what's right for the kids. Let's make sure we don't have generational poverty, and let's make sure we don't trap children in a place that prevents them from learning and growing. Are there changes that could be made to this bill? Absolutely. And I am working on changes for an amendment to this bill that we will make on the floor, because there are some problematic areas even for me. I didn't draft this bill. It's not my bill. And I will work to make it the best possible bill out there. But let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I will never, ever, ever back down from giving every child in this state, the best possible future. I will never back down from letting parents. How dare we say we know better than parents when we're talking about the needs of the child that they have loved and raised and are creating to be a member and contributing participant in our broader communities? How dare I say I know better than they do? How dare I? There are a lot of parts of this bill that get at a lot of different areas of choice, whether that's public school choice, private school choice, public innovation, private innovation. I think I'll end with this. I was once in a classroom, a civics classroom, high school government, and a young lady asked me about how it felt to be discriminated against in the workplace. And this has nothing to do with discrimination, but my response is exactly what I want to get at here. I said, I don't experience discrimination, but let me tell you, if I did, I would never, ever, ever allow someone else to have the power over me to determine my destiny. And yet here we are allowing a system rather than a parent the control over determining their child's very own destiny. I appreciate this lively conversation, and I look forward to more as we bring this bill to the floor. And I would appreciate a yes vote. So with that, I will move Senate Study Bill 1065.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sinclair has moved passage of SSB 1065. Senator Kornbach, how would you like to vote? Okay. The Secretary will record the vote. And 7 nays. Oh, sorry. The vote is 8 yeas, 7 nays. The bill passes and will move to the calendar under Rule 40.